We're talking about cyber security and why it matters to you as a person, to your institution, and to the nation as a whole, or maybe even the world. There's a plan to hold a global conference on cyber capacity building, and it's happening here in Ghana. Why the choice of Ghana? We'll talk about that. But what is our general cybersecurity situation like? Having in studio two persons to help us with this conversation. Dr. Albert Entwibo-Siakun is the Director General of the Cybersecurity Authority of Ghana under the Ministry of Communication. You're welcome to Point Blank, sir.
Very well.
How are you doing? Please come close to the microphone. Right. How is it going?
Well, we're doing pretty okay. Just that we've been quite busy because the digital space is quite an active place. Mm-hmm. And as you rightly mentioned, as we increase our connectivity at individual level, businesses, government, then it means that the hackers are also busy. They're getting the number of targets.
I see.
That certainly as an authority.
Please check for me later if my phone is not hacked. If they've not hacked my phone, I don't want them to.
It all depends what you use the phone for and the kind of security you have on that.
Don't say it. Let's leave it there. Right. I also have in studio Christopher Painter. He's president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Foundation. You're welcome, sir.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
How are you doing?
Pretty good.
What do you do?
Well, I'm the president of this platform, which is a multi-stakeholder group that really helps with cyber capacity building, helping countries around the world be better prepared for all the cyber threats that we just heard about, but also sees some of the real opportunities in cyberspace.
So just not in one country, but you're working on a global agenda.
Globally, we're doing a lot of work in Africa, but also in Asia, in Latin America, and the Caribbean, really all over the world. This is a global issue. There is no country, there is no place in the world that doesn't care about this, and we're all interdependent.
Doc, let me start with you. At the Cybersecurity Authority, what are you guys supposed to be doing? You are a state institution or state agency.
Very well.
What do you do?
Well, I think our mandate pretty much, we're a regulatory body, first of all, and therefore we set the regulatory requirement expectations, framework guidelines to protect our digital economy, the cyberspace, individual businesses, governments, children. So that is primarily our responsibility. But we also have a responsibility to educate the public to prevent cyber attacks. We have a responsibility to provide risk management best practices for institutions such as critical information infrastructure designated institutions. These are institutions that their survival is critical to the running of our digital ecosystem now.
So protecting us against cyber attacks would be your biggest job. But you mentioned children there. How big a deal is that, children in the cyberspace?
It is. I think in recent times, children are facing risks on the internet. The risks around the contact that they establish on the internet, the risks associated with the content, certain content are not certainly fit for purpose for children. But also some conduct of our own children, bullying others on the internet also poses risks on them. Recently, I think you've been following quite the issues around sextortion. This is one of the common forms of online threat against children, and our females become quite vulnerable. And I think we strengthen the legal regime by introducing sanctions, criminal sanctions against such practices under the Cybersecurity Act, which is obviously helping to mitigate the trend a little bit.
There are some terms that we hear, such as cyberbullying. We hear about revenge porn and all these things that are coming up. And when we see people's videos coming up in the public domain, and these are usually nude or sexually explicit videos, is that under your domain? Is that something you are supposed to deal with and prevent?
Okay, good. I think we have a rule. Within the cybersphere, it's not only one agency that have responsibility. Even Chris will mention that it goes beyond our Ghanaian jurisdiction. For example, in terms of our domestic arrangement, you have the CID, which has a responsibility. You have the Gender Ministry, you have domestic violence and others. You have YOCO. So it is a collective responsibility, thankfully. Under Section 13 of our Cybersecurity Act, we've set up what we call the Joint Cybersecurity Committee. All these agencies are part of it. So it is a joint activity, and mostly the work that the authority does. So, for example, we host the national set. So 292, Ghanaian public can report some of this. But once we receive the report, we work with the other agencies, depending on the type of report. We work with the CID, either the NIB or EOCO or any of the agencies as well. So I think we have a responsibility, but first of all, to educate the public so that we don't even get to the point where we have such large number of victims. Awareness creation is one of the key mandates of the authority.
But did these things happen on social media? A lot of these social media platforms are not hosted here in Ghana. How do you control what you don't own or regulate?
I think control is difficult to achieve within the internet space. But also, well, I think my understanding, the internet was born under the premise of freedom. So it wasn't meant to be controlled. But I think nations are trying to, sometimes they get frustrated, not able to manage the risks that could endanger their societies, try to sometimes shut down the internet and other, which Ghana has refrained from that particular angle. But it's a question of what can you prevent, what can you manage, and what can you do with international partners, including service providers, the big firms, to be able to deal with that. There's been a bit of difficulty, right, in addressing some of these challenges, because sometimes what even constitute a criminal offense in Ghana may not be as such in the U.S. And you have, these big tech firms mainly operate in the U.S. We are mainly consumers. We consume the technology where U.S. is an infrastructure country. So I think it's been a difficult, but gradually there is that emerging consensus that we need to harmonize the legislations. I think that's some of the work that Chris
and I'm going to just bring Chris in. Chris, so we are going global. You're doing this discussion of cyber on the global level, but to the person listening to us, why should cybersecurity matter?
Well, I think every person relies increasingly on cyber for everything in their lives, right? Everyone, you mentioned your phone. Your phone is a computer. Your phone is a digital platform that you use to not just talk to people, but to get on the internet, to use social media, do your banking. Governments rely on this infrastructure, this international infrastructure on the internet for almost everything they do now. And then, as Albert mentioned, if you look at these major, what they call critical infrastructure, waters, dams, power supply, financial systems, they're all increasingly dependent on cyber means. So, if you don't have good cybersecurity, all those things are at risk. Your privacy at risk, your money's at risk, your institutions are at risk, your government's at risk, your businesses are at risk, and this basic infrastructure that keeps you alive and makes you happy is at risk. And so everyone should care about it. And, again, as it was said, it's a global issue, so that we can't afford to have any country be the weakest link, because the criminals, the cyber attackers, they're pretty smart guys. Most of them, not everyone's smart, but I like the non-smart ones, but there are too many smart ones out there, and the smart ones will look for ways to evade detection, to do things that are hard to trace. They'll look at the seams. They'll go to countries that don't have strong laws. They'll go to countries that don't have things like the CSA, don't have a cybersecurity agency, who are not taking the steps they need to do. And because even if I was an attacker in the United States and I was attacking my next door neighbor, I'd route it through countries where it's hard to do anything about it. So as a global community, we care about it. But the other reason we care about it is, Ghana is a good example. Ghana is one of many countries that's saying we want to have a new digital future. We're hanging our hat, our economic hat and our social hat
On digital,
on having a digitization. And, I'm very happy that in Ghana, cybersecurity is a core pillar of that digitization strategy. It's not true everywhere, but if you want to have that, if you want to have confidence, if you want to attract investment, you want to have economic growth, you need that good cybersecurity. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. And a lot of countries don't have the resources. They don't have the ability yet. And we need to work. The whole point really of this conference is to say, hey, we need to up our game. We really need to prioritize this and figure out a way to call much more attention to. So
I was actually going to ask why you chose Ghana, whether we were engaging in a lot of cyber security issues. That's why you chose us. But rather it's because of our digital plans.
Yeah, I mean, and
so this is economy related more.
In part, yeah, and also Ghana has been a member of the GFC of our platform. Our platform is what we call a multi-stakeholder platform.
Okay.
We have a bunch of companies, we have civil society, we have academia, and we have about 60 countries, including Ghana. We're joined together on this effort.
And did you let me bring what's this conference about? So you are bringing cybersecurity experts or people who are good at hacking, bringing all of them to Accra.
No.
Is that what you're planning to do?
Not really. But I think, well, thank you. Chris made a point, not because there's a number of cyber security threat, that is why we host it. But I think Ghana, over the past years, have been actively engaged in international cooperation activities. In other words, we've been part of the international system. Cyber is a global commodity, I call that. And to deal with that, it goes beyond the arrangement you do at the domestic level. You need to engage internationally. As I said, you may be using Gmail, Hotmail. It's not. The infrastructure is not being hosted here. So that international cooperation. So we built partnership with the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, the Council of Europe, GFC, which is Chris' primary agency leading this process globally. We've also done bilateral engagement with U.S. government, Israeli government, and other multi-national institutions. Therefore, as Chris mentioned, the team here is developmental in nature. So it's not really the tech community. It's not the conference goes beyond that. Of course, we have representation from the tech community, but we have representation from government, from business, from academia, from development partners. The whole idea is there is a need for us to prioritize investment in cybersecurity because we are digitalized and our society is being transformed from the traditional ways to digital, and therefore every investment. So one of the key expectations here is once we are deploying digital infrastructure or we seek to transform our economies through digitalization, the question we should ask ourselves is what is a cybersecurity consideration? And capacity is required at all levels. And I think that is one of the primary objectives. But it's not just about development. The other term is sustainability. We need to sustain, because imagine we're running mobile interoperability. It has become part of us, isn't it? We transfer money and others. How do we sustain this? They run on network systems. It's very important. So it's not something that you just set up and then you let it run. How sustainable our effort, activities, our practices are going to sustain this transition we have transformed, whether we like it or not, in terms of developing our economy, our society, political system, economic models around digital infrastructure, especially with the coming into being AI. Right, you're hearing that. It means the speed by which we're going to use technology to run. Thank you. And I think Chris may have.
And technology is neither good or bad, right? You know that, but there are bad people who use it in a bad way, and there are good people who use it in a good way. And so
it's a good servant and a bad master.
Yeah, and so it's just it's what happens with every technology since the beginning of humankind, right? So and it's happening now, and it happens with cyber, and that's unfortunate. But I look at this as, the capacity building to me is the foundation, not just for combating all the bad things we see, but also achieving all the good things we want to do on the internet. And one of the things we're trying to do in this meeting, and it's not just, there's lots of conferences, right? You probably hear about conferences all over the world. Yeah. Sometimes there's so many summits, it seems like a mountain range, but this is different because the idea here is not just to have a conference, but to have an action plan going forward where we're going to build action to help with these resources, get focus on this. And one key thing is bringing two different communities together. Like you've probably seen this all over in different parts of government and business and everything else. And I even found it true when I was working in the White House, where the people who did economic policy didn't really talk to the people who did security policy. They had whole different ways of speaking.
So they're not talking to each other.
They're not. But in this space, the people who do development projects, the people who do like water, power all over the world, haven't really talked to the cyber people, and vice versa. So one of the goals of this conference is bring those communities together. That's why the World Bank is an important partner.
So what I was going to ask is, at the end of this, what would be the achievement? What would you say are your major achievements you're expecting to see?
Well, one thing, and I'm sure you can expand on this too, but one key thing is, like I said, I don't want this conference to happen and then be forgotten about. I always fear that you put out something, it becomes shelfware, as they call it. Someone puts on the shelf and never looks at it again. We have a document that's coming out of this conference called the Accra Call, because we're in Accra.
Okay.
And so it's a framework for action that has a number of pillars. I can't really go into them now in too much detail because we haven't released it yet. We don't want to steal the thunder of the conference.
Okay.
But the idea is to galvanize option, to get all these different stakeholders, get people to endorse it, and it's voluntary, but then monitor movement on this and make sure that we have forward progress on all these important issues going for the next few years, so that we just don't drop the ball. It becomes an important point of time, but just the beginning.
Did you are the host, so you're hosting this? Yes, go ahead.
Very well, Mario. I wanted to touch on something. Chris mentioned Accra Call. Umaru may have been hearing some terms like the Budapest Convention, Malabo Convention. I think the legacy of this conference is that Ghana is contributing to the global development of cyber. We not only get on the support, but we are also contributing to the process. And I think this conference, the fact that we are hosting, it has attached our name to the historical development of cybersecurity, that one day in the future somebody will mention Accra Core, referencing the sort of actionable items, initiative, guidelines that state globally will need to follow to ensure that they achieve certain cyber resilience in a sustainable manner that will certainly underpin our development. So I think it's an important conference, having close to 800 delegates from more than 100 countries
coming here. Why are you bringing 800 people here when you are doing cyber? Why don't you do virtual?
We are first and foremost social beings.
Okay, so you want to meet in person?
We all lived through the pandemic, obviously, and that was great in terms of doing everything online. But there's no substitute for having the conversations in the hallways, talking to people, the face-to-face. We have both, and we'll stream it.
Does it mean everybody who wants to come?
COVID couldn't even push social interaction away. I wouldn't be very frank with you.
So can we come in? Can anybody just walk in, or this is just for people who wear glasses, who are cyber guys, who are critical pressing computers, who are supposed to be there?
It's a closed conference, but it's also going to be streamed online. So you can follow it along. There's nothing secret about it. We want this to be out in the open, but we're limited in how many people we can have, particularly because it's a global conference and we're going to do a lot of regional settings there. So it's a conversation for everyone, but it's one that we have a limited number of people who can actually be there, even though it's a large group.
Very well. Guys, I have to thank you for joining us tonight for dinner on Point Blank. Thank you so much, and wish you all the best at this conference.
Very well, sir. For having us, it's always a pleasure.
I'll have you again in studio. Later we'll talk about more.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's Dr. Albert Entry Bosiaku. He's the Director General of the Cybersecurity Authority of Ghana, and also Christopher Painter, President of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Foundation.